Hi, this is Dave Belsky, your host of the Sunset Session. We have a huge studio audience here today. I'm really excited for our guest, one of the greatest people I've met in this entire industry, Vinayak Shastry from Ember Valley, the CEO. Great to have you on board here.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
No problem. So let's take it from the top here. You're currently the CEO of Ember Valley. Ember Valley is known for high quality indoor flowers, a brand sold in California. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else about Ember Valley that defines it?
We're more product guys than we are brand guys. So really core to our ethos is growing product and managing supply chain, managing sales, managing operations to ensure that, from the time that we grow it and harvest it to the time it gets on a shelf is, as short as possible. And so, hopefully every time you buy a jar, you're getting really good fresh weed.
That's great. So I think that's an important differentiation because as we saw, especially in like 2018 in California, there's a lot of brands that we're trying to create a marketing image of a brand, but we're controlling their supply chain. What you're talking about is Ember Valley is really focused on high quality, consistent consumer experience, and you grow your own cannabis that you sell in-house.
That's precisely right, yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yep.
But this isn't your first foray into cannabis. You had worked in cannabis before, and as far as I understand, you were living in the Bay Area, forefront of the cannabis industry. You see legalization pass, and you like, this is an industry that I believe in, and you looked into finding some type of property in Oakland, and then what happened from there? How did you actually become like a full-time employed? You were president of Suniva.
President
for the US.
of U.S. operations at Suniva. That's right. I was introduced to the then management of Suniva through a business contact of mine in the marijuana industry. And the moment the light bulb went off, when I really got religion on the macro, I guess, was during a trip to Vancouver to meet the Suniva team. And it was, I believe, at Castle Brock's, which is a
well-known corporate law firm.
I believe so, yeah, in Canada, in their boardroom. And I was sitting there, I was like, holy cow, man, this is real. And so that's when the mind shift happened for me, when I said, okay, this is my vocation from here on out.
Right, it was sitting there. And so Suniva came in, and like you had got this facility, maybe you'd already got the license from the city of Oakland or the...
Yeah, we just, this is in 2017, so we just gotten local licensure for this facility. My introduction to Suniva was around clones. They were building what was a very high-tech, very expensive greenhouse in California, and they wanted a... It's
a famous story, the $100 million greenhouse in Cathedral City.
That's right, and they wanted clean clones. And that was the genesis of my conversation with Suniva, which very quickly migrated to, hey, we'd like you to come run U.S. operations, and we'd like to buy your facility. So that's where it ended up.
Wow. Obviously that was late 2017, entering 2018.
That's right, yep.
January 1st, 2018, cannabis is legal in California. Mm-hmm. Different time than it is now from an industry standpoint, to say the least. Yep. I mean, and I think in 2018, a lot of the initial source of capital was from the Canadian capital markets. Mm-hmm. There wasn't really too much of a formed, private equity, there wasn't a lot in the space. Sale leasebacks weren't yet as formalized. IIP was just getting off the ground.
There wasn't really even much that I recall in the way of MSOs back then.
Right.
And it wasn't even that long ago.
Right. I mean, if you look at like a Cresco Labs, I mean, they went from 10 million in revenue to 250 million in revenue per quarter over the last 2.5 years. I mean, it's been a quick scaling.
Yep.
Yeah. So talk to me about running U.S. operations for a Canadian company that's just massively focused on construction, right? They weren't even operating yet, right?
Yeah. In retrospect, Suniva did a great job of engaging with the investor community, raising capital and evangelizing and articulating a strategic vision.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I saw as that business model was really foundationed on the availability of capital. Ember Valley is very different because, like I mentioned to you, we haven't raised capital. And so what we're foundationed on is just day-to-day execution and operations.
Right. Which good, sound business practices in any industry. Understand what you're good at, focusing on execution, staying lean, staying focused on your core competencies versus what I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, like a lot of the Canadian, capital infusion was about grow as much as you can, keep growing, there's money here, it's going to stay, this is the ground floor, and then all of a sudden it was like, how are you going to actually make money?
Yeah. And
the switch was quick, right?
It was really quick. I mean, as so often tends to be the case with like boom bust cycles. I remember I came out of school, undergrad, right when the internet bubble burst, and it was the same thing, man.
That's tough. You had your friends that 2 or 3 years older that got some stock options, maybe cashed out, or maybe nothing.
Yeah, no, there were these companies. Doubt you've heard of any of them, but like there's one called CMGI, which was an internet content aggregator, I believe, and like multi-billion-dollar company, and within the course of 6 months just ceased to exist.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean that washing out happened again in cannabis, it seems, in 2019.
Which is an actual, if you think looking back, it's not good to go through that, and unfortunately be an operator and have to deal with laying people off. That is always hard stuff, but it's a signal of any maturing industry to go through that phase of like really understanding what the business model is for the industry and how to monetize the operations of it.
Well, and you make it through the other side of that, and it's a very different landscape at that point.
It's a different landscape, and you have domain knowledge, and you have credibility. And I think focusing on what a company's good at is how companies have survived in California specifically.
Yeah.
Is if you have to be good at something and really good, and you double down, quit trying to do everything for everybody. It's too capital intensive, and because California is still dominated by not MSOs, right? Like talk to me about, like, because you've obviously done a lot of work, probably talked to a lot of them from a BD standpoint, won't name names, but talking about the difference between like an Illinois and a California.
It seems like the more eastern states, the quote unquote limited license states, are just very well curated, and we've done minimal BD as it pertains to engagement with the MSOs, something quite frankly I need to get better about. But at least from my vantage point, you look at states like Illinois or Pennsylvania or wherever, and it's a regulatory oligopoly. And I think I stole that from Adam Bierman. I heard him say it once in a talk, and I really liked it. But the barrier to entry there is getting the license and maybe capital, right? And if you cross those two moats, it's not to say that making money isn't a challenge and generating revenue isn't a challenge and scaling isn't a challenge, because it always is when you're trying to start a business. Right. But like I said, it's much better curated at the state level for the businesses. If you're one of those chosen few that get a license, you're probably going to do well. California is a knife fight. It's very different here. License availability is much easier. Retail aside, retail tends to be very difficult, but if you're a producer, an extractor, a manufacturer, a cultivator, licensure is much easier here. But lo and behold, you get into the marketplace and there's a lot more competition.
Right, and it's constantly changing because it's still the biggest cannabis market on the planet. It's bigger than the Canadian domestic market.
Sure, yeah.
And it's just a state, and so no matter what, there's still going to be people trying to make it happen in California cannabis and entrepreneurial energy. There's so much of it out here, and there's so much cannabis history, and then you put that in combination, it's like we're still early stage in this. There's no winners, at this point. There's some folks that are obviously doing well, and speaking of doing well, you're very humble, and there's a lot of work to do. But starting Ember Valley, it was about focusing on execution and having a lane and operating. Right, and part of that is team, and like you were employee 1, 2, or 3 from Ember Valley, somewhere in that range, right? And how many people work there now?
Oh gosh,
150 people, and growing, because you have another facility to staff in the Bay Area. So when you look to hire people, what do you look for?
It's funny that you should ask that.
Well, I'm a recruiter, Vinny.
You are. We look for the FlowerHire stamp of approval, as does any good cannabis company. our collective thinking as an organization has evolved a lot on that as we've matured as a company, if that makes sense. When we started, we were looking to hire skill sets, if that makes sense. And the focus was on hiring skill sets. I need a guy who
you have an org you're trying to build. Cultivation, processing, everything.
And you're trying to organize too, right? When we started, we were, there's a lot of motion, but it was, if you were to look under the hood, peek under the hood of Ember Valley, it would look like a rugby scrum. It just looked like chaos, right?
It's startup.
Yeah, exactly. And we've gotten a little bit better from there. So now looks more like a football down, right? Where you can kind of, if you're not a student of the game, you can kind of make out what's happening, but it's still a lot of people running into each other. And I always say I'd like this to look like a game of chess. So we're on that evolution. But here's the big philosophical change as it pertains to team building that happened with us. It was like, when we got started, the questions or the remarks were, I need a guy who knows Excel. I need a guy who knows QuickBooks. I need a guy who has relationships with these accounts, right? So it was very skill set or criteria driven. Now, thankfully, we've made a little bit more progress. There's more depth and heft behind our organization. So now we try to hire more on kind of softer qualities, if that makes sense, right? On the who, like, are you a problem solver? How proactive are you? How motivated are you? Right. Which is, like I said, it's a big philosophical change, especially if you're the guy doing the hiring, right? And we have to consistently push ourselves for that.
It's a change on how hiring is typically done in other industries these days, right? Because the modern job search with technology has been dumbed down to some keywords and some bullet points.
Sure.
And, auto reject algorithms and things like that. But in cannabis, it's like, bullet points are part of the battle, but most people have never done the job in cannabis that you're hiring. So they have to be trained. And it's all about, can they learn? Are they passionate what they're doing? And are they going to be loyal and responsible?
That's precisely right. I mean, you hit the nail exactly on the head. So to your point, exactly how you described it, now, we need to continue scaling. We continue to grow, right? So now there's this concerted effort to change the criteria and the process of hiring to focusing on, skill sets and experiences to what type of person are we hiring? Because, a lot of this stuff, the industry as a whole is just making it up as we go, right?
Absolutely. And, it's good to be able to build that process as you build the company, but, it's an opportunity at all levels, this industry. I mean, it's a chance to work hard and work your way up. And in a lot of industries, that's not always the case, right? So you find people that appreciate that are going to take advantage of it. It's really special because they come in, they work hard, and you reward them because you see the work that they're doing, the impact that they have. It's not like you wait 12 months to get a 3% review, right? That's awesome. So I remember I saw like your activation that Ember Valley did at Hall of Flowers in 2019, and it was awesome. It was like well done. The swag was on point. The mason jars were on point. It was in a prime location, and obviously now Ember Valley is one of the top-selling indoor flower brands in the state, available in tons of delivery shops and hundreds of physical retail stores. How was that? How did you pull off that activation? Because it was like wasn't it very kind of, you weren't long in the job as CEO before you.
No, that was 3 months in, maybe 4 months in, and we were broke at that point. We didn't have a lot of money, so
bootstrapped.
What's that? Bootstrapped. And remember the car fire. Remember the car fire in Northern California? It was at that time the largest.
Oh.
That actually burnt down the electrical substation that fed our first facility.
Wow.
So we lost power to that facility for a couple weeks, lost every plant, and we had to replant. So we were running on fumes at that point. So like we were talking before I came up here, a lot of this stuff is serendipity. We had a minimal budget for that show. And so it was actually our head of sales, Ryan Burke, that called an audible and said, okay, we're not going to try to do anything fancy. We'll just let our product speak for itself. And that's where all the mason jars full of product came from, and it resonated.
I mean, it was genius. I mean, it was like, we just have lots of high quality flower. That's what we're about. So what is next for Ember Valley? Like, where does it go from here as one of the top producers of high quality indoor flower in California? What's next?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, core to our ethos is we're operators. So, if we're selling indoor flowers, because we're growing it. If we're selling extracts, it's because we're extracting them. So we're under construction on a manufacturing and distribution facility so that we can broaden our product offering into concentrates, what have you. That's next, right? So primarily, if you go to walk into any dispensary and seek out Ember Valley, like 95% of what we have to offer is just flower right now. Yeah. I'd really like to see that broaden up a little bit. That's what's next. And then beyond that, I'm not sure. Do
you think Ember Valley? I mean, the grower behind your partner, what was his name?
Ryan Muse.
Ryan Muse has been growing quality cannabis for a long time.
Quite some time, yeah.
In Northern California, he's really good at what he does.
Yeah.
I think there's an opportunity to turn into almost like a lifestyle type brand in some ways. I know it's like a lot of like the cookies and the Jungle Boys and like you see that. I don't know if that's always necessary because obviously high quality flower sells, but Ember Valley it means something.
I think I've heard that term. Usually it's from Canadian bankers, but I've heard that term used a lot, lifestyle brand. And I think that there's precious few lifestyle brands in cannabis, like true lifestyle brands that
are authentic,
that really resonate to the consumer, right? That people actually identify with on a personal level. And that takes time. It takes time to develop that ethos, and you got to live it. And to your point, the authenticity, and I don't know if it's a social media thing, with the advent of social media, it changes how people connect with brands, or whether it's a cultural thing, the Gen Z and the millennial, I guess the back half of the millennial generation, like how they connect with brands, or maybe a combination of the two, right? But I think when you say lifestyle brand, it's what is the lifestyle, right? Who do you hang out with? Right. And we're still figuring that out as a brand, quite honestly. What's core to our company and what's really important to us is to be true to ourselves. And as we we're newcomers to the space, right? Like you said, like the Cookies of the world, the Jungle Boys of the world, they've been doing this a long time. Right. DNA genetics, right? Well before we got here. And through the course of them doing their thing, they found their voice, right? And they found their community that now support their brand. That takes time. Right. And so, for us, it's just do what we do, come bring your A game every single day and be ourselves, and, find that community that supports us in the same way. That's been our approach to this point on that.
Well, I do think a good way to build a brand, if it's not that type of story, is understand what you're good at and delivering for your customers consistently. Yep. And so that is the foundation. And a lot of folks have unnecessarily failed for trying to do more than that. And obviously there's lots of work to do, and there's a lot of competition in California, but continuing to do that and do that well, is exactly the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I found is you can't fake it. Right. You can't, for the sake of building a brand, you can't pretend to be something you're not.
You gotta be honest.
Yeah, because your customers are gonna see right through it, right, and they're not gonna like it.
Yeah, and you're gonna waste precious time and resources and alienate people. Yep. In today's day and age, if you're not honest, people will see right through it. Yep. Right. I guess last thing we'll make it interesting. The most unexpected thing that you've learned about California cannabis culture.
The most unexpected thing that I've learned about California cannabis culture. God, that's a
that's a zinger. Okay, we'll edit that one out.
Okay.
Okay. Question: most random like interview story that ended up turning out to be a fantastic employee.
Oh, this is amazing. Okay, so you know Ryan Burke.
Yeah.
He introduced me to you. So he joined me at Suniva as head of sales, and he followed me to Ember Valley when I came over. And I was so busy at that point that he was hounding me. Like he'd follow up with me 3-4 times a week because he needed the job, and I was, we didn't even have a facility built, so I wasn't really prioritizing.
Yeah, I don't have anything to sell, man.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have any weed to sell. So he finally pinned me down. And I remember I met him at some cafe in Glendale. He was fuming, right? And his words to me was, "Who the hell makes the decisions around here anyway?" I got so pissed off. I was like, "You know what? I do. You're hired." And that's how Ryan and I started working together, and it's been a hell of a ride since.
Absolutely it has, and there's chapters to be written. So prediction for California's cannabis industry, it's 2025. What's going on? What is the business model? Are there more brands? Are there less brands? What's gonna happen?
I think you're always going to have a vibrant and dynamic brand ecosystem because it's getting easier to start a brand. When we got started building Ember Valley, you couldn't have a flower brand especially in indoor, unless you grew the flower yourself, because there wasn't enough flower to go around. Right. There was this weird arbitrage where bulk pounds of indoor flower were actually trading at a higher price than what you would sell it for to a dispensary for, right? So if you're running a brand-only company, you just had to underwrite to be margin negative, like on a unit economics basis for every single jar that you sold. That's normalized. So I think as more capacity comes on, the barrier to entry for brands is going to decrease because product's going to become more available. But on that note, I think it's going to get more competitive at different levels, right? So I think it's going to be easier to insert brands at shops here and there. I think it's going to get much more challenging to scale brands. And certainly, we blinked, and there's some folks who entered the indoor flower market who are just exceptional at what they do, and they weren't here when we started.
Right.
So I think that's a dynamic that you're going to continue to see. And I think, and we're seeing this already, the retailers are going to start aggressively vertically integrating. So it's going to be Prop 215 all over again, right? Yeah. This is not a new market. Like California is a very old, very mature market for cannabis. It's just the regulations changed, and it was a little bit of a disruption. It opened up some pockets for some new guys to come in. But they're back in the Prop 215 days, there were operators who were running 30, 40, 50, 80 dispensaries. Right. And so, you're starting to see that again, where you're starting to see groups that are winning up licenses. They have, anywhere from a dozen to 20 plus licenses that they're taking live. They're building grows to vertically integrate. So, all that's happening, but it's happening in a much more organic way than, say, what you see happening in a lot of the limited license states.
Right. So what sales will turn into eventually in 2025 is it'll be a lot more horse trading. It'll be like, okay, you have your products, we have our products. We want you to sell in our stores. You need to sell, I want to sell in your stores, and we might buy bulk flower from you. You might buy concentrates from us. It's going to be those type of relationships.
It's going to get very complicated.
Yeah,
definitely.
Thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
Coming on board today. So the sunset didn't cooperate that well. We got the end of June gloom here, which is a real thing in Southern California, but still a nice view and great company. Thank you, sir.